RTP to downtown on 1 Glenwood.
Really? Wow. Yeah, I was thinking about going back. They asked me, but I was like, I'll probably go back to the New York office.
Oh.
If anything.
Work remote.
Work remote and then just fly if I need to.
Right.
Yeah. But,
All right,
yeah.
we're gonna
But
get
I
ahead
signed
and
with
call this
a
meeting to
different
order.
firm.
Call to order for the June 13th, 2022 Apex Planning Board. Please bow your head for the invocation. Father God, thank you for another day and the opportunity to serve the town of Apex. Give us the guidance we need to do what is best for this town. In your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Diane, do we have any items of information?
We do. I wanted to introduce our brand new planning board members. Sarah So, welcome. I think most of you said hello, but just for the benefit of the public, Sarah is a licensed registered architect practicing in New York and Pennsylvania. Her experience includes large-scale projects in healthcare, mixed-use development, master planning, and stadiums. And she received her bachelor's degree from University of Florida and her master's from University of Pennsylvania in architecture. And she's been active in design and local community volunteering in various nonprofits. And so she moved here from Philadelphia in 2020. And so we welcome Sarah. Happy to have you.
Welcome.
And this might be a little loud.
It's a little hot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one more item of information. So I'd like to introduce our next newest planning technician. This is Tony Abanez. He's been hired to fill a vacant planning technician position, and today is his very first day, so you get to meet him on his first day. He has over 30 years of work experience, having served in the U.S. Army, a 20-year corporate career in manufacturing, sales, and distribution with BASF, and most recently serving the needs of clients as a realtor. Tony also worked for the U.S. Census Bureau for most of 2020. So we're happy to have him on staff with us, and everybody just give him a good welcome.
Welcome, Tony.
Welcome.
All right, so we do have some public comment. Public comment is a section for the public to speak on items that do not appear in the agenda in the public hearings. Any member of the public wishing to comment on the public hearing items will be called at the appropriate time later in the agenda. Ask them to please sign in to my right and your left. The public comment period is an opportunity for the public to express concerns or opinions, but is not intended to be a question and answer session. During public comment, the public may comment on any non-public hearing item, including new business items that appear in this agenda. Comments from the public on new business items will not be taken later in the agenda, so if you wish to speak, you have 3 minutes to do that, and when your 3 minutes are up, I will ask that you wrap up your comments. If there are a large number of speakers for one particular item, I will ask that you have a representative to speak for the entire group, limiting the comments to 9 minutes. If not, comments on a single topic should not be repetitive in nature. If comments were already made by another speaker, please state your agreement with that prior speaker and do not repeat what is already said. Moving on then to consent item number 1, which is the minutes from the May 9th, 2020. Have you all read them? Any comments or questions or corrections or motions?
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Seeing a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, I have a second from Keith. Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposing? All right, passes unanimously. That moves us on to item number 1. Shannon Cox is going to discuss the 2045 land use map.
All right. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Yes, our first and only public hearing is to consider a possible amendment to the 2045 land use map. And it's actually not a map change, it's only a legend change. We are proposing to add a new land use classification that would be titled Rural Transition Residential. It would correspond with a land use vision of 1 dwelling unit per 1 acre. And that falls right in between our existing rural density residential, which is 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres, and low density residential, which is 3 dwelling units, up to 3 dwelling units per 1 acre. This new classification would most likely serve as a transition between the rural density areas and low density areas. There's currently a fairly substantial gap in the classifications that we have. This new classification may correspond with what developers actually intend to put on the ground, instead of having to go up to a low density residential or stay at the rural density residential. The other change would be a table change. This is also shown on the 2045 land use map. We would add the classification here and show that it corresponds with the CB, which is conservation buffer, RR, rural residential, and PUD, plan unit development zoning districts. Since we're not proposing any actual map changes this evening, the planning board and town council would have an opportunity to consider any future requests to show this rural transition land use classification, and would review each based on the merits and the context at that time. Are there any questions?
Shannon, I apologize. Could you repeat that last statement again? I want to make sure I understood it. There's,
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, so this afternoon, we're not proposing any changes to the map, so we're not saying, let's show the rural transition residential in this area. The planning board and town council always have an opportunity to review land use map amendments. Oftentimes, that's associated with a rezoning case. So any future amendments would be reviewed based on their merits and the context of that request.
Can I ask how was this name developed?
The name itself?
Yes.
So we met with the planning committee of town council to discuss this possible amendment, and had proposed a different name. I don't recall what it was.
Very low density, which was a name that had been used previously, but they did not like it.
Yeah. So brainstormed alternative names. This felt like it captured the purpose, which is really between rural density and low density. I believe we also looked at Wake counties and other land use classifications, and that was the origination.
I do actually have, the reason why I asked is I do have concerns about the name.
Okay.
I think the reason and the rationale, I'm excited that we're, listening sort of to the feedback and that are adjusting accordingly. So I don't have overall any concerns with the change. However, I am concerned that without designation, and I understand that we're not making UDO changes, but sort of without understanding what rural transition means in terms of what that looks like in the UDO, I'm a little concerned that we are naming something without fully understanding what is going to come behind that. And so I'm intrigued that there was another consideration, and very, very low density was part of that. I understand that wasn't, that was not approved. So I want to hear, but I actually do have a proposal, and I would love to tell you my proposal and then let you. So my proposal would be that it's a rural density residential 1, if or until there is further explanation and understanding on what this actually looks like in terms of UDO. I'm a little concerned that we are naming something that our community doesn't know what that means. We can't see it on a map. We don't know what that is gonna look like in terms of, other than the dwelling unit per acre, what that's actually gonna look like in terms of other items that might come before us. I would love to see a lot more definition before naming it. That's all.
It will not be in the UDO. What's in the UDO is rural residential, 1 unit per acre. And if you look in rural residential in the UDO, it'll give you an explanation of what that zoning district is. We currently do not have a land use designation that is associated with a 1 unit per acre, which is rural residential zoning. This is just a land use designation. Whether you call it very low density, rural transition, different name altogether, it still means the same thing. It's 1 unit per acre, which is the rural residential zoning district, which is already in the UDO. There will be no changes to the UDO.
So I think that names do have meaning, right? And so my fear is saying, in calling it rural transition, that we might be naming something that may or may not be the case, that the community may or may not agree with.
So do you like very low density or some alternate that's not rural transition? Because very low density used to be on our land use map. That was our recommendation. For whatever reason, the planning committee did not like that. If you all would like us to go back to that, I am 1000% good with that. That's what we used to call it.
I think my proposal I was coming in with was rural density residential 1, knowing that it needs to be kind of a it's between what is existing now, rural density and low density, and kind of like rural density 1 or rural density A, but a way to distinguish that it's between those two. I guess I think I'm not okay with the word transition. I fear that we're putting something into the ether that we aren't naming and defining for the community at large. And so what does that mean when something comes before us? I understand that we'll, get that moment sort of, with anything that comes before it zoning wise, but I think when you name something, it actually does put it out there as to like what that intention is.
So my recommendation, if you're going to use ones, you have to do 1 and 2. Rural density 1 would be our current rural density, and rural density 2 would be the 1 unit per acre. That would be the way to do it. Is that what would that be?
That would be fine with me, but I'm not.
That's fine. That's fine with us. Basically, all we wanted was that because of the state law change, when folks rezone to the RR district, you can see on our land use map, it now shows as low density because there was no corresponding 1 unit per acre. So it's very misleading on the land use map.
Right. Yep, no, I am completely in favor of making a change. It's literally just the name.
Okay, so whatever planning board would like, that's fine. The nomenclatures, that it would go to council and it'd be their decision, that's fine with us.
And prior to the flume change, was the very low density 1 unit per acre shown on the map? Or I guess.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow.
So did we, prior to rural density residential of 1 unit per 5 acres, going back when it was very low density, was it defined as 1 unit per acre, or has it always been 5 units an acre?
No, it was 1 unit per acre. So we were just proposing to bring that back.
Okay.
And for whatever reason, the planning committee didn't like, they thought it was lazy to say very low, to use the word very. But that's what it used to be, so that's why we had proposed to bring it back. And they had talked about doing 1s and 2s and that type of stuff, which that's fine. We just thought it might be easier to have a different name. But if it was better to do rural density 1 and rural density 2, that's fine.
I don't disagree that very is somewhat subjective, because if you have somebody that's a preservationalist that has a farm might say, well, 1 and 5 is pretty dense, whereas somebody that's like wanting to develop their property, a farmer that wants to sell, might say that 1 unit an acre isn't dense enough. So I could see the numerical value to that.
It's up to y'all, whatever you would like to recommend, that's fine.
So do we have more conversation or do we have a motion?
If I'm happy to make a motion, but these were my concerns, so other folks.
You don't have anybody sitting here, but just, this is a public hearing, so just wanted to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So do we need to close the public hearing then? Close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for further discussion or a motion.
Okay, I would propose that, let me make sure I get this right. that we approve the land use map amendment with the legend title being rural density residential 1 instead of the proposed rural transition residential.
So again, it would be better to do rural
Two.
density, yes, rural density residential 1 for the one that is for RA, and rural density residential 2 for the one that's RR.
So approve item 1 in the land use, to amend the land use map to reflect rural density residential 1 for the 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres, and rural density residential 2 for the 1 dwelling unit per 1 acre, which is in lieu of the rural transition residential.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, got a motion from Tina and a second from Ryan. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposing? All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, that moves us on to new business. Shelley Mayo is going to talk to us about the hazard mitigation plan.
Hey, everybody.
Hello.
So what we have in front of you is the annual update to the 2020, to the Hazard Mitigation Action Plan. Hazard Mitigation Action Plan is the table at the back that was attached of the Hazard Mitigation Plan. And the updated table was attached to your staff report. That's just the list of things that we are actively pursuing and actively doing to mitigate the hazards. To give you a little bit of background about hazard mitigation, because it's not something that comes up very often, there are 2 important federal acts that you need to be aware of that require hazard mitigation planning on the local level. First one is an act from 1988, the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act, and then the 2000 Disaster Mitigation Act. Both of these require state and local governments to develop and adopt FEMA-approved hazard mitigation plans if we want federal disaster money to help us in the case of an issue. So if we don't want that money, we don't have to do anything. We're operating under the assumption that everybody in the room wants that money in case we need it. So the hazard mitigation planning is actually a process where we go through and we try to identify the risks and vulnerabilities associated with natural disasters in our areas and develop some long-term strategies for protecting people and property. So generally, and it's very localized depending on where you happen to live in the country. For example, California is going to do a lot more about earthquakes than we are. We do occasionally have them, but they generally just make us all go, whoa, what was that? Whereas we're going to see a lot more tornadoes, hurricanes, and thunderstorms than other places will. In December 2019, Apex adopted the Wake County Multi-Jurisdictional Hazard Mitigation Plan. What this basically means is that all of Wake County gets together and we all work on one comprehensive hazard mitigation plan together. We've been doing that for the last 10 years. And then the plan actually recommends an annual update outlining progress on each of the action plan items. So this annual update just makes sure that we're thinking about them on at least a yearly basis and that we're continuing to address things as they pop up and kind of look forward to what we can do as we accomplish goals. Unfortunately, COVID happened, so we didn't actually have a 2021 update because it was COVID. So this is, we ended up skipping a year. That's not a requirement legally. It is, however, a recommendation, so we're getting back into that as soon as we can. I don't want you guys to think that planning does this. We coordinate, I set up the meeting, I act as the staff secretary, and I talk to you lovely people. But everybody on this list, and that's every department in town, works on this. and everybody puts their time into it and works hard to get the data for me to put in the table that I've given you. And there have been a number of updates to people on this, so some of these people are fairly new in their positions and we're still helping me out quite a bit. This is definitely a group effort. I'm just going to go through kind of some of the big changes. I'm going to hit the completed items, the new items, and then just give you a high overview of some things that are still ongoing, just selecting a few of those. If you've taken a look at this table, the yellow items on here are new. The gray ones, and this was in your email, have been completed and are closed out, and everything else is ongoing. We have a lot of ongoing things because we've been doing this for a while. So just to let you know, we've got two kind of big deal things that were completed. We went through a process to evaluate a stormwater utility fee and program to fund the town's stormwater program, and we actually instituted that program last year. So if we had actually had the time to do the update in 2021, it would have been on that update. And then we relocated a sewer line out of Beaver Creek. And this is a big deal because if we have a thunderstorm, a flood, or a hurricane, nobody wants to deal with the mess that would happen from a ruptured sewer line, particularly in Beaver Creek, since it's our biggest creek in the area, other than Middle Creek. We've added some new items. We put the stormwater utility program, the implementation, on here. That will be an ongoing thing from here on out. We've added some things on here that we've been doing for a long time, but we just didn't have on the list, so we weren't getting credit for, like the tree trimming for all the electric lines in town. And that's a big deal because it keeps us from losing power when we have those big storms. We are also updating the UDO to add separation standards between daycares and hazardous uses and separation standards around the use gas and fuel wholesale. We're working with Triangle Land Conservancy and Cary on the White Oak Creek Corridor Preservation and Maintenance Study. We're hoping to acquire some more land to preserve the wetlands and floodplain around that area. Electric substation number 4 is under construction. That's up near Jenks and 64. And that's going to provide us some additional redundancy in case of storms and other weather issues. New one that we just found out that Public Works is working on is to determine a temporary storage site for debris removal for when we have those big storms that knock everything down. And IT has been working on changing the location of our backup data recovery site. It was located a little too close to town previously, and now it's a little further away so that if something happens, we have a better chance of not losing all our data.
Question on that, why wouldn't we just go cloud?
That is an excellent question that I don't have the answer for. I can look into it and ask. I know that we have a lot of our data on the cloud, but a lot of our files are either proprietary or are large enough that it takes a very long time to download them. GIS files are extremely large a lot of times, so some of that might be the reason for it, but I can double check.
Okay, thank you.
And then we're working on a stream location in the nature park that'll prevent an impact to an existing sewer line. When they evaluated whether to move the sewer line or the stream in this particular situation, it made more sense to shift the location of the stream. The electric department sends out quarterly customer lists to Duke Energy around Sharon Harris so that everybody who needs one gets one of these tone alert radios in case there's an issue. And then Fire is working on creating a situational awareness dashboard in the Emergency Operations Center so that if there's a problem, they get real-time updates to that as much as possible. We're also planning to work on a town-wide plan for staging and distribution of resources and emergency services. So that would need to be somewhere in a large park or something similar. And then just to give you an idea of some of the in-progress items that we're still working on, Beaver Creek, Middle Creek, and Apex West greenways are all under construction or approaching opening bids to get those constructed. We don't always think of greenways as helping for evacuation, but that's because not all disasters are town-wide disasters. Sometimes you have a fairly localized disaster that you really just need to get people away from, a mile or two away. For anybody who's been in the area a while, you might remember the EQ blow up that we had about, 15, 20 years ago.
15?
We needed to get people a couple of miles away. And it didn't need to be for a particularly long time, just long enough to let those gases disperse. And so if all the roads are blocked off, having the ability to take the greenway down to your cousin's sister's house 2 miles down the way is still a great way to do that and make sure everybody's safe. So that helps us to minimize traffic, but also still get people away when we need to. Jesse Drive is still on our list, and we are working on this. I got an update from Shannon a couple of days ago that we're looking at design drawings for a portion of that with one of our projects coming in. So that portion will be designed and hopefully constructed within the next 5 years. Unfortunately, all of Jesse Drive is looking like it's going to take more than 5 years to get done. The southwest loop connection for the Peakway is looking at completion within 3 to 5 years. I just got that update from Russell a couple days ago. And then the southeast connection is still taking a little bit more time. That's the more difficult one. So we're still looking at a little more than 5 years on that one. Planning is still working with, on and working with other departments to update our species selection and practices for planting. And then we're working on the construction of Public Safety Station number 6, and that should be done within the next couple of years. If you guys have any questions for me, I am happy to answer them. Okay.
Thank you, Shannon. I'll bring it back to the board for any comments or possible motion.
Motion to approve as presented.
I have a motion from Keith. Do I have a second?
Second?
I have a second from Tina. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposing? All right, that passes unanimously. That brings us to item number 2 with Amanda Bunce. We're going to talk about some UDO updates.
All right, we have a few various amendments for you today. So the first amendment is to the retaining structure section of the UDO. And as you may be aware, we currently restrict the height of retaining walls on single-family and duplex lots to no more than 6 feet high, with no more than 2 6-foot-high sections. And the proposal is to increase the height when the retaining structure is associated with a walkout basement, basically extending from the house out toward the back of the lot. And so the proposal is to allow retaining structures associated with walkout basements, single-family duplex lots to not exceed the first floor finished floor elevation, and that they shall not encroach into any required setback. Are there any questions on this First Amendment?
About engineering of the wall, is that also a requirement now, if it is 6 feet?
If it's over 5 feet, then
5.
that requires a building permit that's engineered. Mhm. Yep. That, and none of that is proposed to change.
Just making sure if it goes higher, somebody, it's not a homeowner.
Right. Yeah, that definitely has to be engineered.
Got it.
All right. The next amendment is to our table of permitted encroachments into required setbacks. And the proposal is to remove HVAC and mechanical units from the appurtenances section, which restricts those, allows that encroachment to be 3 feet into any required setback as long as it's no closer than 3 feet to the side or rear property line. And instead to allow them to be placed anywhere in the side or rear yard to be consistent with state building code provisions. Any questions on that standard?
I have a question. Does
Yes.
that include generators?
That would include any type of mechanical equipment as proposed, yes. Okay. The next amendment is to various uses in the UDO in order to allow pet crematory to be an accessory use in the uses kennel, pet services, and veterinary clinic or hospital. We recently had a phone call from someone that wanted to know how this would be allowed and realized the UDO did not anticipate this. And so the proposal was to amend the definitions for veterinary clinic or hospital, kennel, and pet services to indicate that that may be a permitted use associated with those. And then some other related amendments striking the word live from the pet services supplemental standard. And so, to reflect the change. Any questions?
I do have, and I don't know anything about a crematory, but is there any like noxious gas or anything that would be like if you have like a vet clinic and like surrounded by residential, is there any concern or is it pretty benign? I just don't know.
So we checked to see if there were any like health code, like health department or other state law regulations surrounding pet crematory, and there's no other standard that we found that's related to this. So I'm not very familiar with this. I have been familiar with funeral homes that have crematories associated with them and have not noticed anything unique about the smell of the air in the area or anything else around that. Okay.
Along those lines, I hear that there's no, that there's not anything that's governing, but we give pretty specific, soundproofing, we give pretty specific pieces that relate to a veterinary clinic or hospital. So again, not having any idea, I do wonder if there is anything we need to be considering. And I actually am particularly thinking of not a specific rezoning application that came before us in which a veterinary clinic may be located almost adjacent to a school.
Yes. So pet crematory has been allowed as part of a veterinary clinic throughout town. We have these all over. What the specific request was to have it at a pet services. And when we discussed this with the owner of the business, we said, well, if you have a veterinary clinic, then you can do this. And she's like, why do I have to have a licensed vet when there's no state law saying I have to have a licensed vet to do a pet crematory? And so we looked at it and it just didn't seem fair. But since we're putting it in the ordinance for pet services, we didn't want a future planning director to make an interpretation that it was not allowed as an accessory use to a veterinary clinic. It's a very common accessory use to a vet clinic because when they euthanize the pets, they typically offer this service. So you'll see if you contact your local, they'll let you know, either they or they have a partnership with somebody that takes care of these things.
I think I have some concerns about just including it. I don't, without additional context.
You don't have anything to go by.
Anything.
Are there any specific concerns? I mean,
We looked into it because we were looking for specificity, and there's just not any.
There's not any state regulation.
There's not, and as far as I could tell, it's not really addressed in other folks' UDOs as well.
And I'm just thinking, actually, I used to work at the Orange County Animal Protection Society, which has a crematorium on site. And so, I mean, I again, not knowing enough, I'm concerned that we would, in particular, single this out and include it when there might be other pieces that we, like sort of the flip side, that we would single us out and include it when we don't have enough information, and there might be information we don't know for whatever reasons, we would single this out and add it in.
It's already allowed as accessory use at vet clinics, so the question is whether or not it's an appropriate accessory use at a pet services or kennel. That's really the question.
I mean, it can't never be used separately, right? It'll be allowed. This revision is to allow the crematory in as an addition, as an accessory to the clinic or the
Yes,
hospital.
and I'll just tell you, there's at least one funeral home for pets in our area, and we would have classified them as a funeral home if that was the only use. They would have been treated just like a human funeral home. So yes, the standalone one will be considered a funeral home if there's not a standalone one that's accessory use to these main uses.
And again, the reason for the addition is that someone wants to offer, and it is not clear that they can,
Correct.
because the interpretation is that it
No, the interpretation's been it's been allowed at vet clinics, and they do not own a vet clinic, they own a pet services business. And they would like to offer pet crematory. They did all their research into what it would require, and there's no state law saying they have to have a vet. And so they pointed out to us that we were being discriminatory by saying they had to have a vet on site.
Okay. Thank you. So it makes me a little queasy, but I think I have no.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. The next amendment is to the accessory apartment section in order to amend the maximum size of the accessory dwelling unit when it's outside of the small town character district. Currently, the standard differentiates based on lot size, whether you're over or under 10 acres. And so the proposal here is just to treat all ADUs outside the small town character area the same and allow them to be no larger than 40% of the heated square footage of the principal single-family dwelling. This is consistent with, I believe, Wake County's standards, and other communities allow similar size instead of just a flat square footage amount. And this is to help encourage the use of ADUs throughout our jurisdiction. Okay. The next amendment is just a cleanup item. When we amended the kennel use 3 years ago or so, we combined kennel indoor and kennel outdoor, and this is just to simply strike the word outdoor from the parking table, just a cleanup item. And finally, there's an amendment to the parking lot design standards section in order to specify when wheel stops are required in parking lots and to provide an exception for the concrete wheel stop requirement on historic properties with gravel parking. And so wheel stops aren't handled really in any detail in the UDO. They're referenced in the engineering standard specifications documents. And so this is just to state that they are required to provide delineation between parking spaces and walkways and to protect landscaping, EV parking structures and buildings. Wheel stops shall comply with the standard specifications and standard details except where exempted in this next section, which allows for uses associated with landmark and other historic structures to use railroad ties or landscape timbers in lieu of concrete wheel stops, as that is the aesthetic that's more appropriate in those circumstances. Is there any questions on this amendment? All right, these are the amendments for today, and planning staff is recommending approval of each of them. Happy to answer any other questions that you may have.
Any other questions for Amanda? All right, bring it back to the board for discussion and a possible motion.
Making a motion to approve the amendments, the EDO amendments as presented.
I have a motion from Tina. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
And a second from Tim. Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposing? All right, that passes unanimously. And I have one more motion that we need, would be a motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn?
Keith motion, do
I'll
I have a
second.
second? Tina second. All right, then we are adjourned.